Okay, American literature guys. All right, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing this week, but especially about what we're doing next week. Next week we have our midterm exam, and this is a midterm exam that basically, for the most part, it will be an essay test. I'll be asking you some questions about the readings we've done this far in the semester. I'll also ask you for, I'll probably have a few questions as far as you'll need to be able to identify certain passages or identify who wrote what. So it should be pretty easy because you will be able to use your textbook. However, whenever you have a midterm and you're able to use your textbook, it's also sometimes a little harder too, because I'm going to ask you questions and I will expect some in-depth answers for these questions. So I highly recommend reviewing everything we've read so far. Make sure that you are familiar with the videos that I've shared with you. I will expect that you're somewhat familiar with the Enlightenment. I will ask you, and I'm just going to let you know, I will ask you, what are the core values of the Age of Enlightenment, and how can you and basically just I'm going to ask you to identify those things. And again, for those of you, I talked about it in previous broadcasts, but essentially when it comes to the Enlightenment, it's a philosophy that is trying to solve humanity's problems using logic, reason, and also the scientific method. It highly prizes individualism, so the individual is very important. It's trying to throw off the old shackles of things like superstition, especially. It throws off anything that is not of reason specifically. So it's always, you can really just think about it as the age of reason, and that is what affected a lot of our early, especially the founding fathers of the United States. Then you're going to be also expected to understand the backlash to that, which was Romanticism. So we're in the period right now where that's the stuff we're reading right now. We're going to be in this period for a while. American Romanticism, and this is a philosophy that came from Europe, but it did sprout and grow very well here in the United States. And essentially, it was a response to that. It was a backlash to that, saying that, is reason really the essence of where all truth comes from? And they're like, I don't think so. And so they did prize the individual, so they very much valued the value of an individual. But with the Romantics, you also see a huge value for nature, which is something that was very different from previous schools of thought and generations. So nature was something that was incredibly powerful. And it was something that, and of course, look at my old lectures on this too, because I'll expect you to remember those things, even if I can't remember it off the top of my head right now. I would recommend you can look up these things on the internet, and of course read them in the textbook. As far as when it comes to Romanticism, we were starting to, or they were starting to really think about the value of nature and the impact that we have on the environment. This was something that you find in the Romantics that you may not have seen earlier on. The concept that nature is ultimately the strongest force, and it's ultimately stronger than anything else, is something you're going to see in the Romantics. You're also going to see a value for folklore, as we've already seen in Washington Irving, and you're going to see a real focus on emotions and emotions as a source of truth. So some of these emotions that you're going to see are not always the most sublime emotions, but they do also focus on sublimity, so that which is sublime. You're going to see this week in Edgar Allan Poe, and you've seen it already in the readings we did for last week, the idea of horror and fear. Those are things that you're often going to see. Basically, a lot of emphasis on emotion and emotional states. So let's take a quick look at where we are in the semester and where we are with readings. Even though next week you will have your midterm, I will still be required that you do just the same thing as we've been doing so far. So you'll have a weekly reading. Last week you read Hawthorne and Cooper, and this week we're going to be reading specifically Edgar Allan Poe. And you're going to be reading The Raven, Annabel Lee, Cask of Amontillado, and the Mask of the Red Death. So there's quite a bit of reading this week, and it's all Edgar Allan Poe. So I want you also, in addition to reading these particular stories, I want you to read the bio on Edgar Allan Poe and really be familiar with who he was, what kind of, he's just a man full of interesting stories, very interesting person. And I want you to understand those things because I may ask you some questions about them on the midterm. As we go through, so as we're going through this semester, I do want you to take it upon yourself to do research on these individuals. And it can really be just as simple as reading the bio and learning about them there. But if you're curious about these people, you can research them on the internet. You find out a lot about these people. So there's a lot to find out. So we basically this week, Edgar Allan Poe, that's what we're reading. All of these readings is what I ask you to read. And you will choose one of these to write your weekly reading on. What I want you to do, and this is something just to kind of remind everybody what we're looking for in these weekly writings, is I'm asking you, I'd like you to write one full paragraph that summarizes the story, the poem, the narrative, whatever, okay? So something that summarizes the thing that you read. And then I want you to write an additional paragraph that explicates that. So when we explicate, and this is something we're going to do a lot more on the second half of the semester, but when we explicate, we are trying to explain. We are trying to draw out meaning. We're trying to basically explain what it is that the author is trying to get across. Or we can also talk about how this story relates to the time period. But essentially, we're looking for meaning. That's the real thing to look for in an explication. That's what we're trying to get out of it, meaning. So take a look at these readings. And again, you're going to summarize. So this is what essentially happened. That's first paragraph. Second paragraph is focused on what does it mean? What are the hidden meanings? Can you point to specific things that was in these particular stories or poems or whatever it is that we're reading later on? Can you point to specific lines, or can you point to specific scenes or imagery that the author uses? What do you think that means, and why do you think that means what you think it means? And you need to be able to justify it. It can't just be, I think it means this. You need to be able to say, because of this reason. And you need to think about things such as the context, right? The historical context, the philosophical context. These things are going to be playing into the meaning, and they will influence what meaning comes from each work of literature that we read this semester. So I really want you to focus on that this week. I have also on your discussion boards, I've held off from grading them, and I've tried to get everybody a chance to catch up. Some people hadn't had a chance to hand things into those discussion boards, so I'm trying to give you a chance to do that. If you've fallen behind, looks like most everybody is doing really, really well. But but we have maybe a couple of stragglers, please get a hold of me so that we can figure this out. Okay, so if you're falling behind, it's only going to get worse if you don't catch up. So let me know what's going on, and I'd be happy to help you if I can. We can always do an office hour, and so just try to communicate with me so that I can best help you. So basically, this is what we're doing this week. Okay, Edgar Allan Poe, or